Okay, welcome to this edition of the Academy. Now today we're going to go over something a little bit more. It's not. This is really isn't basic, but this is actually a little more challenging to put into practice, and it requires a little creativity in many cases. Not every case though. The topic I want to cover today is making a fair fight unfair. You see, we're used to in our world of sports, for example, and everything being fair. Boxing, no hitting below the belt, kind of rules. In football, both American and European soccer, you can only certain players can only be in certain parts of the field at certain times. Both teams have the same number of guys on the team. Everything's equal. That makes for great sport, great entertainment. But that makes for foolish warfare. Clausewitz actually said it best. He who starts a fight without an advantage is a fool. Okay, I'm going to use that strong language. I think it's strong anyway. It's foolish, but yet here we are in all the war games I've ever played, whether it was the old Panzer Leader, Squad Leader, board games, or 40K. Everything that I see, it's always a balanced game. Oh, it's so important to have a balanced game. And yes, again, for entertainment purposes, it really is. But how do you win when everything's fair? There was a game back out in the, I want to say it was the 70s, maybe it was early 80s, but it was called Tactics, and it was literally two sides, identical units, identical strength, they're equal 100%. Extremely difficult game to play and win because there was no way to really force an upset in your opponent. It was just you whittle each other down, and it was not a very successful game, but it did get a lot of people thinking about war games and get them into war games. Some of the other games that came later, which are more simulations, they actually allowed enough variety within the units and within the way the order of battle was set up, so you could make your fair fight unfair. It was still based on points because you didn't want to have someone to be really outmatched. Of course, scenarios can be written that way. I personally enjoy playing scenarios where maybe I'm the underdog. I don't always like to be on top. I know I play Tau, but remember, I started playing Tau back when they were in their weaker 5th edition state, or 4th edition codex in the 5th edition. And it feels good to take a weaker force and still make a good showing. But how do you take, especially with codexes out there like Eldar and Tau, how do you make this fair fight that GW puts on us, or any other game manufacturer, and how do you make it unfair so that you have an advantage? Well, there's actually a few different ways to do that, but it always comes down to this. You have to make the decisions where on the field you're going to put these things into practice. The fact is, whenever you study military sciences, they're always talking in terms of combat strength. Now, it doesn't mean numbers of guys or numbers of guns. It's the effectiveness of the various units, and everything's measured by combat capability, combat effectiveness. When you do that, you take out all the things that clutter the discussion about numbers and quantity of soldiers or quantity of tanks or quantity of whatever. It's about the quality of those things and how they're used. And here's the key. It takes, to be successful, you have to outnumber your opponent, not in numbers, but in quality, combat capability, by 2 to 1 at least, 3 to 1 preferably. And that's not counting if the opponent's in a fortification. Fortification, you need at least 4 to 1. That, you will find that almost as an axiom in a lot of military science books. So, well, how do you do that if you've got the same number of points on your side as I've got on my side? I see your 2,000 point army, I see mine, and it's going to be a slugfest. How do I do something about that? Well, there's a few ways. Now, one of the ways you can do that is by finding force multipliers. Now, force multipliers, I've heard some people say, well, that's an American term, but I found it in books that go back from other authors in different countries too. So it's not just an American term, but a force multiplier is something that takes your combat capability and makes it stronger without adding additional equipment, men, guns, what have you. Okay, so for example, think in terms of, we're going to go back a bit in history. When two armies faced each other prior to gunpowder, you had swords, shields, spears, hand to hand. An effective force multiplier, for example, would have been archers or slingers. Every meter that the opponent had to advance where you could be putting weapons into them, arrows and slings, bullets, you would be able to deal out damage and whittle them down before they even reached you. That's a force multiplier. Cavalry or chariots, those are also force multipliers, because again, now you're trying to use shock tactics to charge in and scare and disrupt the opponent. Once they're disrupted, their unit cohesion falls apart, and your units are more capable than theirs in a foot-to-foot fight, hand-to-hand fight. Okay, so you want to think in terms of force multipliers. Now, in Games Workshop, or well, I guess a lot of war games parlance, think of those as buffs. What buffs can you give your army? Relatively little small point cost, but they apply to a lot of different units. Psychers are a good one. Of course, I play Tau, so I don't have a lot of Psychers. I do play Eldar, so that's where I do end up using Psychers, and to some advantage. Guide and Prescience, those are fantastic force multipliers. Anything that allows you to make your 2-hit or 2-wound rolls stronger, or improve your saves. Terrain is a force multiplier. If you can get your opponent to funnel through a choke point, for example, moving around impassable terrain, buildings that you can't enter, for example, then you can protect through line of sight, blocking terrain, some of your units from attack, and yet when they come into the open, you can pounce on them with everything you got. So those are the kind of things you want to think about, force multipliers, buffs. Knowing the Eldar Codex like I do and the Tau Codex, I can come up with a lot of examples out of those. Still trying to piece out some of the good buffs, the Dark Eldar Codex. Imperial Guard, I'm just waiting for the next good codex to come out. Because the orders there are a fantastic buff, but that comes with the commander units and the platoon units. So you need to come up with other ways of these to come up with force multipliers. Range is a good one. If you can have longer range weapons than your opponent, that means you're shooting them first. If you can stagger your front line such that you are always able to stay just out of your opponent's weapon range, even after they move, but you're always able to be within your weapon range, you can shoot them with unanswered fires. That's a force multiplier right there. Again, just like the archers in a hand-to-hand fight. You're going to hit them, they can't respond in kind. Very important there. Outflanking. Come in from the side. Get that side armor that you can't get otherwise. Now, I guess that's not available in every codex or every unit, but there's a lot of potential there. Think of how many Imperial armored units are side armor 10. All those vicious wyverns that everyone really hates to face. Bring in a couple of orc buggies with Dakaguns. We got Dakaguns. I forget what they're called offhand. But they're 3 shots, strength 5. You get 5 buggies coming in. It's 15 shots. Okay, they're going to hit 1/3 of the time. That's 5 hits. You're going to pen a couple times, and every single one of those you take out is just that much better. Okay. And again, you're getting those side armor shots. You're getting behind the cover, and that's what you want to try to do. These next couple ideas are a little bit harder to implement because it all depends on who's who's deploying first. But one of the concepts is, we'll call it a flank refusal. Okay. If you were to deploy all along the board edge, whether it's Dawn of War or, well, any of the 3, just along the entire edge, you've got everything evenly spaced, you are putting your force out there at an even strength across the battlefield. Now your opponent, who sets up second, can instead then put his entire force in one corner or the other, essentially minimizing the ability of that other half of your army. So you want to kind of think about doing that to your opponent. It's great to go second because you get to respond to the opponent's deployment, and you get to, in the reserve side, you get to ensure that hopefully their units are on so you can respond to what they've done instead of the other way around. So look at concentrating your force at not necessarily concentrating in a small space, but on one half of the board, because remember, blast templates will start wreaking havoc on closely packed stuff. So that allows you to focus. Let's just pretend you deploy all your army. There's no reserves. So you have a 2,000 point list. You have 2,000 points on one half of the board facing 1,000 of the other opponents. The fight's not fair now. So you have an advantage. Put your armor, piercing stuff, right on where it's going to do the most damage, right in front, next to what it's going to need to hit. Keeping what is vulnerable on your side far away from the opponent's other corner where he's got some key units. I had an opponent with some artillery parked in one corner of the board. He was going to be able to, I was doing Dark Elders, and he was going to be able to wipe out my infantry with no trouble with those. And he had another heavy tank on the very far flank. Well, I deployed all on one corner of the board with everything that, no, not everything, but with my initial forces, with a lot of things in reserve. So his heavy tank took 3 turns before it could get within range to do anything. 3 turns out of a 5+ turn game, I just rendered his unit useless. And yet I was able to focus all of my Dark Lances on his other corner of the board, which had a squadron of, I forget what the Imperium or Mechanicus, the 30k Mechanicus type army things were, but I was able to take out, seriously damage one of those, shake them up, get them to start snap shooting. When they're snap shooting, they're not as effective. And then the second turn I was able to come in with reserves and deal death and take them out. So by concentrating my force on one side, I rendered half his army useless and had an advantage on my side of the board. Very, very useful approach. So think in terms of how you really want to deploy. In terms of reinforcements, you can do the same thing in that you can bait the opponent. So deploy on one corner of the field, especially if you're going first. Your opponent then does kind of the same. And now when you come in reserves, you can draw them, in the first turn, draw them toward your units. And you have 2 sides you can come in on, and you have a little more flexibility to, especially if you have longer reach weapons, like the Bright Lance or some of the las cannons, coming off the side, stay farther away from their units, but you're able to hit them and deal out the damage. So again, try to focus a large part of your army on a small part of theirs and deal out as much damage in that way as you can. Now you might say you've heard that before, and there's a truth to that statement. You want to keep pouring fire into a single unit till it's gone. That's you want to destroy units, but you don't want to necessarily just keep shooting and shooting and shooting at something. You want to apply the overwhelming firepower on that table side so that you have extra units, so that in case you roll bad, you can still take them out. Or if you don't roll bad, you can use those other units to hit the next piece of their army. So I'm trying to expand and explain why you want to focus fire on for your whole army on a small portion of your opponents. So that's kind of how you make a fair fight unfair. And if you're going to make it unfair, you're more likely to win. Of course, dice being what they are, it doesn't always work out that way. But still, that's the concept I wanted to share with you today. Again, let's, as before, comment below. Let's have a little discussion. Share, like, and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next version of the Academy. Thank you very much.